The depths of the oceans have long inspired wonder, but hidden far from the sea, another world waits to be discovered. The Great Lakes. We're on a mission to use cutting-edge underwater drones to explore the lake's most amazing places.
Wow, look at that guy.
And to bring you along for the adventure live.
We made it to 100 meters.
Today, we have rare access to one of the most mesmerizing places in the lakes. On Lake Huron, beside Bruce Power, one of the largest nuclear generating stations on Earth, warm water flows into a cold lake, creating a hot spot we call Fish City. Here, more than a dozen species, drawn by the warmth, gather in these crystal clear waters. From familiar faces to species few have ever seen. We have no idea who we'll encounter. Expect the unexpected on Fish City, a Hidden Below live stream. Welcome aboard the Tailspinner and happy Earth Day. Today, we're on Lake Huron, the second largest of the Great Lakes, the biggest freshwater system on Earth. I'm Zach Melnick, a filmmaker and fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society and an underwater drone pilot. My partner Yvonne and I have spent hundreds of days exploring freshwater environments. Why freshwater? We've all seen the wonders of the ocean, and we know they're worth protecting, but few people realize just how extraordinary the freshwater world can be. Our mission is to use advanced technology to reveal that hidden world, to share its beauty and help protect it. We're incredibly excited to share that with the support of the Nature Conservancy of Canada, TV Ontario, and many amazing partners, we're now filming Hidden Below the Great Lakes, a new underwater wildlife documentary. And along the way, we're bringing you with us live in partnership with Great Lakes Now and Detroit PBS. Today, that brings us to one of the most unexpected places in the freshwater world, the warm water outflow of the Bruce Power Nuclear Generating Station, the largest nuclear power plant in North America. Here, warm water meets a cold lake and creates something extraordinary. We've got two fantastic guests with us to help guide the experience and answer your questions. Nicholas Mandrak, renowned fish biologist and co-author of A Field Guide to Freshwater Fishes of Ontario, and Cherie-Lee Fietsch, a senior environmental scientist with Bruce Power. Behind the scenes is Jocelyn Bentley, switching cameras and fielding your questions. Say hi, Jossie.
Hi, guys.
On deck, Andrew Bunziak is running our surface camera. And of course, Yvonne is out there getting ready to launch the robot. We're about to head underwater, but first, Yvonne is going to show you a little bit about how the system works. Yvonne?
Hi, folks. I'm Yvonne. I'm also a fellow of the RCGS, and this is our robot. It's a boxfish Luna robot. It weighs about 60 pounds. It can go up to 500 meters or 1,600 feet deep, and it has 8 thrusters, so we can fly in any direction, just like a fish. And inside, we've got a super low light camera that lets us see really deep without the addition of additional lights, and a rounded dome on front corrects those underwater optics so that the picture doesn't look wonky to us. It uses a fiber optic tether because we can't send a signal through the water the same way you do through the air with an aerial drone. So this connects us back to the boat, and Zach's going to drive the robot with his console there back in the cabin. And I think we're about ready to go here. So back to you, Zach.
Thanks, Yvonne. While she's launching and managing the tether, I'll be piloting the ROV here from inside the cabin. Our robot uses sonar and underwater positioning to track its location while we capture uncompressed 4K video in real time. All right, Yvonne, how are we looking out there?
I'm ready to go when you are, Zach.
Before we dive, one quick note. This is a controlled and challenging environment. We've been working closely with Bruce Power for months to safely access this site. Strong currents and restricted zone make this a place you can't and shouldn't really explore on your own. All right, let's do this.
Okay, ready to go? All right, go
Oh,
ahead, Zach.
Okay. I am just starting motors here. Just a second. We got a little bit of a technical difficulty, of course. Okay, so the camera is back up again. So we'll just 1 second. Of course, this always happens when you're dealing with advanced tech here. So I'm going to hit enable on the motors. Okay, and do I have power there, Yvonne?
Yep, and just a strong current is pulling you toward the dock.
Okay,
There
so I'm gonna, so there's, as I say, there's very strong currents in this land. So we're gonna go down now. And fortunately, the water isn't quite as clear as we would normally expect in this place, because we've had a huge amount of rain, and that has caused a bunch of runoff. Oh, and right now the fish are getting a little bit excited here, but let's get down here and kind of get settled, see what's happening. Okay, so what are we looking at here, Nick?
We are looking at a very large school of gizzard shad, which is a herring native to all of the Great Lakes. And you can see that it has a very rounded snout at the front of the head, and then a very long fin on the underneath of the fish near the tail, and those characters together tell us that it's a gizzard shad. And this is a species that eats microscopic plankton, little plants and animals that are microscopic, living in the water column. And they they swim through that water column, feeding on those plants. I know we have another species here. I think a lot of viewers will recognize this very curious bass, and it is a smallmouth bass.
And what do you think these bass might be getting ready to do around this time, Nick?
Well, they will be spawning in the next month or two. An interesting thing about bass spawning is they actually build nests, and then they lay their eggs, and then they defend the nest, and then they defend the young as they hatch.
So just to add to that, it's Cherie-Lee here. We monitor bass nesting in these discharge channels in the local bay to door. We've been doing that for many, many years now, and we're starting to see some of these bass start to pair up. They tend to start to do this a little bit earlier, given the warmer water in the discharge channel, and they raise their fry and young here. And we're able to see last year gobies predating on those nests, and the male defensing, having the great defense against that. And so it's quite an interesting phenomenon. These fry are able to race successfully. We're able to monitor all their stages moving through the discharge channel. So it really does show about the viability of the water here.
And there was a couple, I saw actually a pair of bass here. So let me go a little bit higher up onto this ridge, and then see if we see anything any more up here, because they're known to we've seen them actually spawning up here before. So just take a quick look. So Cherie-Lee, why don't you tell us a bit more about why the water is warmer coming out of the plant?
Yeah, sure. So as a nuclear power plant, we use the water from the lake for once through cooling. And so as a result of that, the water does come out a little bit warmer. Right now, the Bruce intake is quite cold. It's about 1.4 degrees coming in, and the water going out is around 12 degrees. And so we typically see that the change in temperature from intake to outfall, the delta T, we call it, is typically around that 8 to 10 degree range. And it's highly regulated. We have a limit of 11 degrees in the summer and 13 degrees degrees in the winter. And we do a lot of monitoring to understand lake temperatures and lake conditions. It's something we've been doing for a really long time. We've had continuous year-round monitoring, both summer and winter, from 2012 onward, and have done pre and post thermal monitoring studies from the operations of A and B, so dating all the way back to the 1960s. And people often ask us, what does that plume look like? What's the size and shape of it? And the answer is, of course, it varies greatly. So here at Bruce B, we have a discharge nozzle to really encourage mixing of that warm water into the lake. It is highly mixed, and of course, the lake conditions and currents cause that size and shape to vary quite a lot. We do measure water temperatures, surface to bottom, as well as on bottom. And then in addition, we have spotter buoys out as well in the summer months. So these are able to provide live data feeds. You're able to look at those on the Seagull platform, thanks to our partners at the Great Lakes Observing System. And so you can check the water temperatures before you go to the beach for the day, which is really great. But it also allows us to have some other full-time, real-time monitoring. And we pull all this information into a hydrodynamic model with our partners at Hydroquantica and overlay climate projections with that model. So we're able to look at changes in activities, understand kind of projections through life of facility, and pull all that into a large thermal risk assessment that's part of our environmental risk assessment. We do that every 5 years. It's posted publicly.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt you there,
go ahead.
but we had another visitor. He didn't. He kind of came right up to the drone and then wasn't sure what what was going on there. But what do you think that was, Nick?
Well, it was a salmon or trout. If I was to guess, I would say a rainbow trout, but I don't think I want to guess because I didn't see it. It was only fleeting. But that would not be unexpected because there are spring and fall rainbow trout runs in Lake Huron.
Yeah. So we're just having a little issue with the mic here. So Nick, I'm gonna actually get you to hold. I have an issue with my mic, so I'm gonna actually get you to hold that mic up there so we can get a little bit of we can get our audio working here again. There's a lot of moving parts in this here. I just need to pull this because I'm a bigger person. Okay, so we're back.
And you can see just how abundant the gizzard shad are, and that's not unusual. Throughout the lake, there's literally millions and millions of gizzard shad in Lake Huron as well as the other Great Lakes.
And Nick, tell us why the warm water is attracting these fish here.
Well, for a couple of reasons. The fish's metabolism works better in warmer water, so they would naturally be attracted to it. But also, after the introduction of invasive species like the invasive mussels, the lake itself has become a lot less productive. So the mussels filter out the food, those microscopic organisms in the water column, and that energy goes into the bottom of the lake where it's not accessible by fishes like gizzard shad. But you can see here, the warmer water actually increases the productivity a little bit. And you can see here on the bottom, you see photosynthesis occurring. That's evidence of productivity, increased production of food. And you can see it visibly on the bottom, but undoubtedly, there's a buffalo recent invader of this part of Lake Huron, and it's gone.
But they're native to the Great Lakes generally, though.
They are native. They were native to Lake Erie, and then they expanded from Lake Erie into Lake Huron probably over the last 20 to 30 years, very likely the result of climate change.
We have a question from YouTube. Is this site available for recreational divers? Sorry, guys, a little technical difficulty there. No, you couldn't hear Yvonne, but we're working on it. So somebody in the cabin, anybody want to answer that question?
Hi, Cherie-Lee here. I'm sorry, I can't hear Yvonne at the moment, but of course, the discharge channel in and of itself, it's not blocked to fishing. It's not really this restricted area like we were explaining at the beginning. It is open. We fishermen were in here this morning. So I think, we would encourage recreational diving here, but it's not a closed area. It is open to the lake.
Well, and then you can see that the currents could be hazardous for diving, and it is. Personally, I would not want to dive in here because of some of the currents and the challenges of even just boating in the channel.
Okay, a new question from YouTube. How many smallmouth bass nest here in a typical year?
There's quite a number. We actually see them utilizing the shelves on the sides, like Zach was showing you with the robot there. It varies depending on water levels, of course. Sometimes the water levels are lower and higher, and their ability to use that habitat is quite variable, but there's quite a number of them for sure in both the A and B discharge channels as well as local bay to door.
Okay, so we're coming up to a spot where the current sort of gets a bit less, and there's a whole bunch of fish hiding behind this one little spot here. So many gizzard shad, but I expect some other species hanging around over here too.
Question from YouTube. How big are the gizzard shad?
We actually saw some on the surface as we were preparing this morning, and they can be up to about 30 centimeters, so quite large.
Yeah, when we see them, when we monitor them as well, that's about the size that we see. They're about 250 to 300 millimeters.
I was hoping that buffalo would come back.
We'll see some more for sure here. Don't worry. We're still getting oriented here. But you can see in the yeah, go ahead.
In the foreground, you can see on the back of the gizzard shad, there's a very long fin ray. That's the last fin ray on the fin on the back, called the dorsal fin, and that's characteristic of this species. And this species is part of a family called the thread fin shads, and that what you just saw was the thread.
Facebook question about how many fish species live in this area.
Well, I know that in the Saugeen Peninsula, upwards of about 60 species have been recorded. In this specific area, I would defer to Cherie-Lee. Oh, and what do we have there? We have a common carp.
Yeah.
From the filming we've been doing with Zach here on the discharge channel, we do see quite a range of species. They do change over time. I'd say on a given day, there's probably at least 12 to 14 different species that we might see. But of course, it changes with time of year.
And it looks like this is a very pregnant common carp here. We find them to be rather a skittish species. so I'm not surprised she's sort of running away from us here. But you can see this is definitely a pregnant common carp here. Now, what's the difference, Nick, between a common carp and an invasive carp, or what we now call invasive carp?
Right. But so the first thing we should point out is that all carps are invasive. The common carp is sort of the original invasive carp in the Great Lakes. It's been here for over 200 years. And in fact, it was deliberately stocked 200 years ago to provide a food fishery for Europeans who didn't like eating the fishes they found in their newly colonized continent. They were not partial to eating trout. They preferred to eat carp. So they brought them over and introduced them. Those invasive carps that you were referring to, that one of which, the grass carp, is now reproducing in Lake Erie, are more recent invaders. They were brought to North America in the 1960s to help with controlling a variety of problems in fish farms in the United States. And they now, well, in the 60s, those fish farms flooded out, those carps got into the Mississippi and started spreading throughout the U.S. and are now threatening the Great Lakes, because we do have connections between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi. And probably the invasive carp that people know best is the one that jumps. And it's the silver carp. It's not in the Great Lakes yet, but it's making its way towards the Great Lakes. It gets up to about 1 meter long and 50 kilograms. And because in the early 2000s, a lot of videos of these jumping carp showed up on YouTube, we believe that really caught the attention of invasive species managers. All of a sudden, these underwater invasive species that were out of sight, out of mind, were now clearly in sight above the water. Because back then, we didn't have technology like this, Zach, to actually see what was under the surface.
Question from Facebook. Have you ever seen any monster-sized muskies in the outflow? Lots of food for them there.
Well, Yvonne and I haven't, but I don't know. Maybe Cherie-Lee has.
I feel like this isn't a prime area for muskies. I think they would prefer like the lower flows. They're not as common here. We don't tend to see them as much more in the local bays as either right in this area. So I think they're really looking for more of that kind of wetland type of habitat, right, Nick?
Yeah, certainly. And I'm sure they would love to eat 30-centimeter long gizzard shad. But again, there just isn't that musky habitat like there is on the eastern shore of Georgian Bay. Here's a nice smallmouth bass.
Yeah, there's a few bass here, and we've actually seen a nest right in this very spot, right beside this rock before here. Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the next little bit, this bass dad doesn't make a nest, and we don't have some the male bass guarding those babies in here.
Yeah, over the next month or so, that you would expect them to be spawning.
Oh, what do we got? So I'm going to see if I can sneak down to see this guy here. So I think, oh, no, I thought it's either a buffalo or a freshwater drum. I think maybe it's a
freshwater drum. So freshwater drum are really interesting because almost all species of drum, several hundred of them, are found in marine waters. And this is one of the few that is exclusively freshwater, and it's found all the way from the Gulf of Mexico to Hudson Bay. So it's one of the most wide-ranging freshwater fishes in North America.
Okay, we've got a special student question from YouTube. Do you know how much the fish population has grown with the warmer water since Bruce Power has been operating on Lake Huron?
I would say like the fish population, it just really does depend on what's happening in the lake. When we really look at the thermal plume and trying to understand what that looks like. We're starting to do some more work with universities on what's called a trophic hotspot to really understand, is there something different happening in the thermal plume versus elsewhere? So we would like to compare something like here versus a river mouth like the Saugeen, for example. But at the moment, we don't really have a good understanding of if there really is a differential from the work I've been doing with Zach and the monitoring we've been doing. We really don't see sort of a difference in the fish population.
Yeah, the alternate hypotheses would be one, the population increases because of the warmer water and the higher productivity. But the second hypothesis could be that the water simply attracts them from other areas, and the population as a result is smaller in other areas. And I would imagine that your research colleagues will be looking at testing those hypotheses. Great question, though.
YouTube question. What has been done to prevent the fish from getting into the plant?
That's a really great question. Thanks for asking that. So we have a lot of measures to help prevent the fish from coming into the plant. So as we take in cooling water, there is a possibility for fish to come in with that water. So we have offshore velocity caps. They're at a depth of 550, 830 meters and 11 and 14 meters of water. So having them out deeper helps avoid the nearshore fish. And then in addition, they have large velocity caps, which helps reduce the velocity to an average about 0.15 meters per second. So the fish can detect that and swim away on calm days. And then in addition, we have chain rope barriers that help deter large schooling fish. So all of those are measures to mitigate. In addition, we built the plant on this headland that juts out into the lake. It's a very high energy zone. So it doesn't really lend itself as a bay or somewhere where fish would congregate. So we did take steps to avoid and then mitigate. And then we've taken further steps. We did have a number of shad come in last winter. And so we've taken further steps to help deter those shad. We have put in like an acoustic and a strobe deterrent. We're testing that out at the moment, and a net to see if that helps also deter the shad from coming in. And we're doing some really cool work, putting in sonar and cameras. We can better understand what those densities of fish look like over time in both our intake and discharge channels. And we're using a really amazing artificial intelligence tool that we're developing with U of T and M&R to help us understand those fish density changes in real time. So a lot of innovation going on to really understand the fish population and also mitigate them coming in.
Cherie-Lee, I assume that the intake doesn't have the same attractant flow as the outtake in terms of temperature, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so the intakes are out deep. Like as I said today, the Bruce B intake is less than 2 degrees, 1.4 degrees. So it's quite, and it's in an area where there's a lot of upwelling. The Bruce A intake is not as in a deep of a area with as much upwelling, but again, it's not in an area that's very attractive for fish.
So one of the interesting things is just watching the schooling behavior, because most of the time when you come upon fish in the Great Lakes, you don't get them in these massive schools, right? So when we look at this imagery and we look at that behavior, it almost twigs something in our minds that feels more like ocean life than it does in what we're used to, fresh water. Are these, or like, how did the fish long ago get into the Great Lakes, Nick? Like, did they come from the oceans originally?
Great question. And a question that I answered many years ago during my graduate school days. So 15,000 years ago, where we are now, there was an ice sheet 1 kilometer thick. In fact, most of Canada was covered by a continental ice sheet during the last ice age, and there were virtually no fishes here. The fishes that are now found in Canada survived south of the ice sheet in the Atlantic coastal and Mississippi basins, and in Alaska in an area known as Beringia. And as the ice sheet melted and the meltwaters ran off, they filled depressions in the recently uncovered landscapes, and those depressions became lakes. And when those lakes filled up, the water poured out of them and into the Atlantic coastal and Mississippi basins, And that allowed fishes to basically swim up these fish superhighways into the Great Lakes, and then northwestward toward all the way up to the Mackenzie River, where there was a whole chain of these massive lakes that were directly filled by the meltwaters of during the last ice age. So about 5,000 years ago, the Great Lakes became isolated from the Mississippi and Atlantic coastal basin. And so in the Great Lakes themselves, we ended up with about 200 of about 1,200 fish species that occur in North America. And then more recently, we've recreated connections between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi and the Atlantic coastal basin, and that has led to the invasion of some invasive species like those invasive carps, white perch, and other species that didn't get here after the last ice age, or were introduced in the United States, and then they secondarily spread into the Great Lakes. And now the American government is spending $1 billion to build a barrier in one of those connections to prevent those invasive carps from getting into the Great Lakes.
YouTube question: how large do the waves get, and where do the fish go during bad weather?
That's a great question. The waves in Lake Huron, I know, can get quite large. I don't know their maximum height, though, off the top of my head, but we were able to look at the near shore and understand this a little bit more from our hydrodynamic modeling. And we are working with universities to help improve some tools for looking at ice conditions as well as wave conditions. And so it's hard to say, I guess, where the fish can go during that time. I think sometimes the stormy conditions help bring out some fish in different areas, but also they may move offshore to help avoid some of that nearshore condition as well.
Thank you. YouTube question, student question from Luna. Do fish ever get curious and watch us like we are watching them?
Luna.
Well,
great question. I think we saw that earlier with that smallmouth bass that swam almost right up to the drone. Yes, they do. And in fact, we use that to our advantage when we want to sample fishes underwater using equipment like this drone, or probably more conventionally GoPro cameras, which we've been doing in the last 10 years. And we actually, sometimes we bait them with like a shiny object that they're curious about. So they'll come up to the camera, and then we can determine what species there are in the water body. So yes, they are curious. And
so there's that salmon again.
Yeah.
And I wonder, it might be a coho, something like that.
We have to get closer. It's got white gums. I can tell you it's not a Chinook salmon, because Chinook salmon have black mouths and gums. But I can't rule out rainbow trout either. So that was a great question from Luna, and I encourage her to go snorkeling to answer her own question firsthand.
And I'd say that, you know, having spent a lot of time underwater with the robots, there are some species that are a lot friendlier and more curious than others. Smallmouth bass is probably the most curious. Sturgeon, actually, we found to be curious sometimes. But it also depends on what the species is doing. So if they're getting ready to spawn, or if they're in a bit of a feeding frenzy, then they're very, very good to be around with the drone too. We can get very close. The other interesting thing is that sometimes if we're in really, really offshore zones, like far, far from the shore, out in the middle of the lakes, sometimes we'll come across species that are more skittish near shore, like lake trout, and they seem to be very curious, just like smallmouth bass. So that's just an observation we've had, but it's very true.
Zach, what about when you use the drone in deeper waters and use lights? Do you notice that fish are attracted to the lights? Because sometimes we put lights in traps in order to attract them to traps in deep water.
We haven't seen that effect, like the huge effect of getting fish being attracted with lights, but it does seem that when the deeper you go, that they also don't care as much about the lights. So if you're way down really deep, then it's a good place to go and film things.
Speaking of the Rove, YouTube question: what sensors are on the Rove besides the camera?
So we have you can't quite see it in that view, but we have an Oculus multi-beam sonar, which sort of paints an image in front of the robot up to 100 meters, so that we can kind of see what's going on. It's a bit like reading the Matrix. But we also have USBL, which is like underwater GPS, so that we can understand where the robot is in relation to the boat. So that's obviously very, very helpful. We have a temperature sensor, so I can tell you right now it's 12.81 degrees here. So those are the main sensors we have on board the robot. But it's a lot of fun to keep adding new sensors and new technology. Well, yeah, that's little turbid here, but see if I can't get a little closer to these buffalo. It seems like the current is also, it's very strong. I'm using all the thruster power really on the robot just to be down here at the moment.
Well, those look like some of the Shire fishes. They keep swimming away as you get close.
Yeah, part of that is probably because I am having to hammer on maximum thrust power, so we're a lot louder than we normally are when we're trying to do this.
You notice that the buffalo look a lot like common carp. One of the main differences is the color of their eye. And when I've had students study buffalo, they say they have this brown cow eye, and that's how they immediately distinguish it from common carp, which has a pink eye. And on top of it, the common carp has barbels or whiskers, 2 sets of them at the sides of their mouth, whereas the buffalo do not. But otherwise, they look quite similar.
And what's cool? What else is cool about the buffalo?
Well, there was a recent study on buffalo on the prairie provinces that indicated that they can grow to be well over 100 years old. And in fact, they're now thinking about doing aging studies using buffalo to determine why they can grow to such an old age.
That's incredible. So that's one of the longest lived freshwater fishes in the Great Lakes then.
Well, I think it's probably the longest lived freshwater fish anywhere, at least the longest lived that is known.
And did that study also say that they don't age? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, well, and we see that with fishes throughout most of their lives. Once they become adults, they are generally in good condition, and they don't gray, But once they're at the very end of their life, their body condition decreases rapidly, and then they pass away. But I think most fishes, for the bulk of their life, don't show the same type of signs of aging that we see in humans.
YouTube question: what is the difference between an invasive fish species and a non-native species that was introduced?
Well, that's an interesting question because researchers debate over what is invasive versus non-native. So let's start off with non-native. Non-native means that the species was not in a location, for example, in Lake Huron since the last ice age. It was only recently introduced, typically as the result of a human-assisted movement. And that could be direct stalking, or it could be indirectly building canals that allow fish to move between basins. It could be, unfortunately, releasing your unwanted goldfish, which is responsible for a lot of goldfish introductions in southern Ontario. Those are all non-native. The ones that are invasive, we generally consider to have a disproportionate negative impact on the other species or the ecosystem. So an invasive species has a substantial impact, negative impact on other species and the ecosystem as a whole. So for example, the grass carp are considered invasive because they were brought to North America to control aquatic vegetation like weeds, aquatic weeds in fish farms, because they eat those aquatic weeds. But you release that fish into the wild, they're going to start eating not weeds, but our native aquatic plants in what we call wetlands. So we expect that if grass carp becomes very established in the wild, in the Great Lakes, that our wetlands will disappear. And our wetlands are very important nursery and feeding areas for over half of the fishes in the Great Lakes.
YouTube question. Are there any recent records of native freshwater mussels in the Bruce outflow?
We do look at native freshwater mussels. We looked, for example, when we looked to remove the Truex Dam in the Saucon River. So we did do some further work on native mussels there. There are native mussels, of course, in the lake in and of itself. There haven't been specific studies done on that, I don't think, in the outflow, but the outflow is very manufactured and the flows are quite high here. So there isn't really the great habitat for some of those larger native mussels in the outflow.
Here's one of the smallmouth bass just chilling and not too concerned about us, now becoming curious. Another one coming to say, what are you looking at?
Student question from Harlan. Do fish have best friends they swim with every day?
Interesting question. I'm guessing, I don't know of any studies that have actually shown that they pair, like, for example, some bird species pair for life. I would say they don't. Maybe we could look at it a different way and say they have a lot of best friends. So as we're going through the water here, you see large schools of gizzard shad that are depending on one another, even though they may not know each other by name, but they're depending on one another to prevent any one of them from being eaten by a predator.
So there's a little bit of sort of behavior between these two fish, right?
Yeah.
So a little bit of a nudge there, a little bit of a. So this might be some what you might call pre-spawning or early spawning behavior. They're
Courtship.
kind of pairing up. Courtship. Yeah.
Yeah. But they may spawn this year, but it doesn't necessarily mean that same pair will spawn next year.
YouTube question. What is the most challenging part of doing field research or being a PhD student out on the lakes?
I can start. I know weather is a big one. Trying to get out there to do your field work is very challenging. And often when you want to observe these fish is in the fall or under really conditions that aren't conducive to boating. And that's one of the large difficulties. And you have to be a bit tough. You have to be able to deal with the conditions. And really, I think for what I've found. It's just the mercy of Mother Nature.
Yeah. Well, and I train a lot of graduate students, and I look for students that are independent, are adaptable, are good at problem solving, because when you're in the field, things always come up that you're not expecting, and often you need to figure out the solution on your own. So that's what I'm looking for in graduate students: independence, problem solving, working hard, because it's expensive to go into the field, and we want to make sure we make the most of the days that we are in the field, and then also, again, are able to adapt to conditions like changes in weather and so on.
So I am seeing a handful of gizzard shad that didn't make it down here.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is, Nick?
Well, there's always mortality in all species, and it's not unexpected to see mortality, particularly at the end of winter, because the productivity does, even in warmer outflows, does go down in winter, and as a result, the fishes will lose condition. That is, they will be leaner, and some of them will get too lean, and as a result, may be more susceptible to starvation or disease. And the one thing about fishes in large schools, if a disease is introduced into the school, it can quickly spread. And you can see a diseased fish right there, for example. But not all of them have that disease, because some of them are in better condition than others. Like they've fed better over winter than others. Some of those diseased fishes may be those fishes that are at the end of their lives as well, and they're just that's part of the natural aging and end of life.
Question from YouTube: how can urban Great Lakes shoreline be improved for fish habitability?
Well, we're not in an urban area here, but you raise a good point, because in urban areas like the Greater Toronto area, the nearshore has been degraded, in part because the nearshore has been filled in to extend the city. So if you go to Toronto, there's a street called Front Street. It was called Front Street because it used to be right on the lake, and now it can be up to 1 kilometer away from the actual lake. So for 100, maybe close to 200 years, we were filling in the front, where we were dumping garbage in the front along the shoreline, because we didn't know any better. Maybe we did, but we didn't have a lot of options. What we can do is we can recreate structure. We can recreate the wetlands. We can add. You can see structure here, like rocks and cobble, and they're doing that across the GTA. Really right across the Canadian shoreline of Lake Ontario, to increase the complexity of the habitat in order to attract more fishes. What do we have here?
Another buffalo there.
Yeah, the brown cow-eye.
YouTube question: are we still stocking the Great Lakes with non-native species?
Not in Canada. The U.S. still stocks some of the Pacific salmons, like Chinook and coho, and even rainbow trout. But to my knowledge, we are not undertaking stocking programs of non-native species anymore.
YouTube question: for those of us watching from home, what is one simple thing we can do to help protect the health of Lake Huron?
I think one simple thing we can all look at is maintaining high water quality. So in this area, of course, we were looking at runoff, making sure we're protecting the zone for drinking water protection, but also just getting out and learning more about the lakes. And when we look at the Great Lakes ecosystem, there's been a large shift because of the invasive mussel population. So a lot of these ecosystem shifts have really affected the ability of the nutrient dynamics in the lake system in and of itself.
Well, and I might choose not releasing our unwanted pets. And the previous question, that actually looks like a goldfish. I can't tell for sure unless I saw whether or not it has barbels, but it looks slightly different than the other common carps that we've seen. Speaking of invasive species, it was on cue that something that I thought might be a goldfish is on the screen. So because we no longer stock non-native species, we've removed that what we call a pathway that was really important for introducing invasive species into the Great Lakes. We don't do that anymore. We are trying to restrict movement of fishes through canals. So in recent years, fish from unwanted pet fishes have been increasingly being released into the wild and become established. And you may think that all aquarium fishes are tropical, but they're not. And in fact, we've shown that there are dozens of fishes in the aquarium trade that if they were released into the wild, they could become established. And at least a subset of them would have negative impacts on the environment. So I'm going to choose not releasing your pet into the wild.
Another project we work on a lot here at Bruce Power is the removal of the invasive Phragmites grass. So it's a highly invasive species. It's taken over our wetlands, particularly the wetland right adjacent here to our site. And we've done a lot of work with the Invasive Phragmites Control Center to remove that Phragmites, and also are looking for ways to kind of keep that at bay. So we've looked at that locally, also in the fishing islands, because again, it changes the structure of that habitat, and some of these are very important nursery areas that are fundamentally shifted. So another thing is to help to remove that. We do a lot of citizen and public outreach to show citizens how to keep that at bay on their own lakefront properties. So certainly another area that we're trying to improve habitat.
Oh, and if I was to choose another potential action, we do have invasive species that are not ubiquitous in southern Ontario. They may be found in some other areas, but not others, but they could be potentially transferred by recreational boats. And so it's really important to clean, drain, dry your boats when you move them between water bodies. And you can look up clean, drain, dry online to find out how to do that.
Has there been a fish species you've been surprised to find either here in these waters or elsewhere in the Great Lakes?
I think for us, the interesting thing that we did last winter is we had Zach and Yvonne come and put their boat in. We went out under the ice, which was pretty exciting. And we were able to understand a little bit more about some of the winter ecology in the lake. And of course, the first thing that we saw with that was grass carp. And I know, Nick, you've talked a little bit about the grass carp already, but I think it was actually interesting to see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the grass carp is established in Lake Erie and is spreading. And it's unfortunate that you actually saw it. It's surprising, but unfortunate. But the interesting thing about grass carp, if they are attracted to this outflow, that's probably a good thing, because if they were to spawn in the outflow, those eggs would not survive and hatch and become, grass carp. So we would consider an area like this outflow to be an ecological trap for grass carp. And it's because they have a very distinctive spawning strategy that's unlike any native species. So with the invasive carps, they have to swim up a river for at least 10, 20 kilometers, spawn, and those eggs have to drift down the length of the river, and they have to hatch before they leave the river. So they need 10, 20 kilometers of river for those eggs to hatch. And because this outflow is much shorter than that, if they were to lay their eggs in the outflow, they would just drop to the bottom of Lake Huron and they would not hatch.
Okay, this is a great question for both Zach and Yvonne, but unfortunately Yvonne's mic's not working. So Zach will have to take the reins. Are there quagga or zebra mussels here?
Well, we see quite a bit of what the science folks called mussel hash. So that is mussel shells. And we saw a few earlier. But overall, I wouldn't say that, there's more mussels here than anywhere else. And the only place right around Bruce Power here where we do see a lot of mussels is on the water intake. So there's kind of a big pipe with a cap on it. Oh, there's a drum. And we see a lot of mussels there. So that's kind of just like a feeding system for those mussels. But everywhere else, I would say it's about average amount of density. And in general, in the Great Lakes, you don't actually see that many in near shore shallow waters in Lake Huron and Michigan anyway. They are a deep water creature these days. So we need to get out to, about 150, 200 feet, 50 or so meters. And that's when you start to see the entire bottom is covered in the quagga mussels. But there isn't a lot here. So, I mean, that's good. But most of them are out there in the deep lakes. Okay, so, well, I think we've seen a bunch of cool fish here today. Fortunately, the clarity wasn't quite as good as we were hoping, but we got to see a bunch of what's going on in this pretty unique place and watch a bunch of fish do their things. So I think I'm going to now try to make my way back towards the boat here. So I'm going to, in this kind of environment, what I'm going to do is gonna try to look for the tether and head back towards the boat.
Okay, while you do that, follow-up YouTube question. I've heard that zebra mussels have been filter feeding on a lot of the excess algae in the water that's fed by runoff fertilizer. Is there a beneficial trade-off there?
Well, they have been doing that. And a good example of that is the western basin of Lake Erie, which historically was the most productive part of the Great Lakes. They've done such a good job that there's not enough food in the western basin for the fishes now, and so they have taken up the nutrients, but too well. And it has affected the native ecosystem. And furthermore, just in general, those nutrients and the interaction between the nutrients and the mussels has been implicated in the blue-green algal blooms that have occurred in the western basin, leading to very large areas that lack oxygen. And if there's no oxygen in an area, no fish can survive in that area. So we have to be careful about thinking about the benefits of the invasive mussels, because I think the impacts outweigh any potential benefits.
Sorry, I just need to communicate with Yvonne for a bit here in order to see what's kind of going on. Because of the water clarity is challenging here, so. Okay.
One final question. YouTube, does this fish city remain active during the winter, or does warm water attract different species depending on the season?
So I think what we're seeing now is kind of the tail end of the winter season, right? So the shad are still here because the lake, as we said, is still quite cold right now.
We trying there. It's
diversity
just,
across the year, so we don't tend to see this many shad, for
really
example,
intense.
as the water tends to warm up. So it definitely does change, and we're certainly doing a lot of work as Bruce Power to understand more about the ecosystem.
Joss, you want to switch to the deck cam there?
Populations to understand if there's locally present populations, which we haven't found that from a genetic distribution.
Andrew's shot.
Working further on understanding thermal benchmarks. And
Andrew's got a good shot of the robot in the water.
Dynamics. So I think there's a lot of things we can certainly grow locally to better understand that system. And
yeah, you're going to have to help me a little bit. Actually, sorry guys, we're going to have to cut the chatter a bit while we try to rescue this craft in this current here. Well, no, it's okay. I can do it, but I just need to. Oh, we're right here at the front. I see. Okay. So you can see we use a trolling motor with spot lock to keep us in position, and it's really working here. And then the robot itself is really pushing against this current. We can go about 3 knots, and that's so that gives you an idea of how fast the water is rushing through here. So I might need, yeah, we might need to find a mechanism for. Yeah, it's going to be intense. Yeah, okay. I'm going to do it. Okay.
And right before we end, if we could just redo that question. I'm so sorry for everybody talking all at once. Does Fish City remain active during the winter, or does the warm water attract different species depending on the season?
Sorry, I just can't hear, so I'm sorry I've talked over you there. So absolutely, I think what we're seeing right now is, as we said, the lake water is still quite cold. The intake is less than 2 degrees at the moment, so we're seeing these shad populations still in the discharge channel. We do see that shift. The shad will disperse as the waters warm up, so we do see that community change. And there is a lot of work that we're doing as a company and with our collaborators to better understand the ecosystem in Lake Huron. So we've been looking at some limnological samples, as well as nutrients and plankton, doing some work with Nick on eDNA, and looking further at establishing some longer-term monitoring sites in the lake as well.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this adventure. A huge thank you to Bruce Power and to Nick and Cherie-Lee for sharing their knowledge today. And thanks to our awesome crew for working through the early glitches on our first live stream here. And of course, none of this would have been possible without the support of our amazing Hidden Below partners. This is just the beginning. Next, we're heading to one of the most extreme environments in the Great Lakes, a place few have ever seen. In June, we'll be attempting something not done in over 40 years, exploring the deepest point in the Great Lakes, Superior Maximus, far offshore in Lake Superior. To follow the journey and see what's coming next, visit hiddenbelow.live or find us on social media at Hidden Below Great Lakes. For now, we're signing off from Fish City, but we'll be heading right out back out there to explore more of this incredible freshwater world. We'll let you know what we find. See you soon.